Buckingham Palace has been shaken to its core by a scandal that no one saw coming. Princess, known for her iron will and unshakable composure, was seen wiping away tears after hearing the cruel words Queen Consort Camilla reported. Lee said about Princess Diana's final moments, "How could she speak of Diana that way?" and reportedly cried, unable to believe what she had heard. Another source close to the scene revealed and heartbreak. Those weren't just words, they were knives. This shocking moment threatens to tear the monarchy apart. Join us to explore the fallout. A shadowed message in the rain fell gently over Windsor Castle, casting long weeping trails down the tall ancient windows. Thunder rumbles somewhere far off, soft and tired like a memory that refused to sleep. Princess moved slowly through the dimly lit corridor, her heels tapping faintly against the polished stone floor. The royal dinner had drained her. She was used to duties, used to long nights filled with smiles and careful words. But this evening had carried a different weight, a feeling she couldn't name, one that settled behind her eyes like a coming storm. The hallway was quiet. Candles flickered inside their wall sconces, casting soft shadows that danced like ghosts of the past, and didn't speak as she passed them. She was deep in thought, remembering something vague, perhaps a moment with her mother, or the way Diana once laughed behind closed doors. Then came the sound of footsteps. She looked up. A servant stood at the far end of the corridor, half hidden behind a marble column. He looked uncertain, almost nervous. When Ned approached, he stepped forward and bowed slightly, holding out a small envelope with both hands. It was cream-colored, the paper thick and fine. On the front, in delicate cursive, read "Private from Camilla," and paused. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, the corners tightening. "Camilla, a personal letter that was rare to rare. She asked me to deliver it tonight, Your Royal Highness," the servant said quietly, his voice almost lost in the sound of distant thunder, and took the letter without a word. She looked down at it for a long moment, as though the paper might speak on its own. Camilla and weren't close. They had shared formalities, smiles in public, a few stiff conversations during family gatherings, but personal letters never, not until now. "Thank you," and said, nodding. Once the servant stepped back and disappeared into the shadows of the castle, and stood there alone, still staring at the letter in her hand. The rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows beside her, as if the night itself were whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. She didn't open the envelope. Instead, she slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat, close to her heart. As she turned and walked toward her chambers, a chill ran down her spine, cold, sharp, and quiet. It wasn't from the rain, it wasn't from the stone walls, but from what she thought the words will hold. So what really was in that envelope? Princess, and how will this change the monarchy? Stick around, the weight of her words. The room was silent, wrapped in the gentle hum of the rain pressing against the tall windows. A single lamp flickered in the corner, casting a soft golden glow that barely touched the shadows lingering along the ceiling. The fire had burned low, and the warmth that once filled the space had slipped away with the night. Princess sat motionless in the old velvet chair by the window, her eyes fixed on the unopened envelope resting in her hands. Hours had passed since she'd first returned from the corridor, yet the letter remained untouched, its seal still perfect, its silence growing louder. Her fingers ran along the edge of the thick paper. She had read the name on the front at least 20 times. "Private from Camilla." Why now? Why her? The name stirred something deep inside, a feeling she had tried to bury years ago. Her lips pressed into a thin line as her thoughts began to drift, pulled back by a force she couldn't resist. She saw Diana again. Not the royal figure, not the woman the world admired and mourned, but the girl who once walked nervously into royal life, eyes wide, unsure, searching for a place to belong. And remembered how distant they had once been, how different they were in spirit. Diana had been soft and emotional, and had always been from focus. Still, there were moments, brief, fleeting, where their souls touched in silence. She recalled one Christmas Eve years ago. Diana had stood by the window in that very room, her arms wrapped around herself, watching snowfall. It's strange, Diana had whispered, not knowing, and was there. To be surrounded by everything, and still feel like I'm vanishing. And hadn't responded then. She hadn't known how, but tonight those words rang louder than ever. She turned the envelope over slowly, her thumb resting on the seal. The paper felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of more than words. She closed her eyes, breathed in deeply, and broke the seal. The letter was written, and Camilla, his hand elegant, deliberate, and surprisingly careful. It began simply, "And this is not it easy to write, but it's time you knew, it's time someone knew," and felt her chest tighten. She continued reading, her eyes scanning the next line, slowly, every word drawing her deeper into something she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "For years I have carried a secret, one I never intended to share. But I can no longer pretend I wasn't there, at least not in spirit. I need you to understand that I never meant for any of it to happen this way." And frowned. The air in the room seemed to shift. Before the crash, Diana spoke to someone I trusted. Once he told me what she said in her final moments. I kept it hidden out of fear, shame, or maybe guilt. But I hear her words every night, even now. And hands trembled. She studied them on her lap and forced herself to continue. She was in the wreckage, barely conscious. She could hardly speak. But she whispered something that broke me when I heard it. She said, "Tell Charles I asked for him. Tell him I asked if he ever truly loved me." And breath caught her heart, which had beaten so steadily all her life, suddenly faltered. She read the line again. She asked for Charles. She asked if he ever truly loved her. A single tear slipped down her cheek. The silence in the room became unbearable. Even the rain seemed to hush. The letter rested limply in her lap now, and leaned back, her eyes staring into the dark space above the fireplace. So that was it. That was what Camilla had hidden all these years, and whispered softly to the shadows. Why now? Diana's voice, her laughter, her sorrow, it all came back in waves. There had been times when, and wanted to shake her, to tell her to be stronger. But now she only wished she had listened more, understood more, been more. She remembered one argument they'd had over something trivial, charity schedules, royal duties. Diana had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "You don't have to like me, and just don't forget me," and had scoffed at the time. But now those words pierced her like a blade. She turned back to the letter. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Camilla had written. "I just thought someone should know the truth, someone who might care, and I believe you did, and your own way," and let out a shaky breath. "I did," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear it. Another line from the letter struck her. "We wear masks in this family, don't we?" Even when they heard us, Diana took hers off too soon, and we left her alone. And covered her mouth as a sob broke free. She hadn't cried like this in years, maybe not since Diana's funeral, when the world had wept and the palace had stood still. She folded the letter gently and placed it on the small table beside her. The flames in the fireplace cracked faintly, barely alive. She stood and walked slowly toward the window. Rain still kissed the glass, and the clouds above were thick, heavy, unmoving. She asked for him and whispered again, pressing her fingers to the cold glass, and he never came. A small noise escaped her, a broken sound she didn't recognize as own, and looked at the photo on the mantel, one taken long ago of the entire royal family. Diana stood beside Charles, smiling politely, but her eyes told a different story. How have they missed it, or had they simply ignored it? In the next chapter, we will explore the true realization of the pain Diana saw, but this time through Anne's eyes. When silence speaks too late, the porcelain cups slipped from Anne's fingers before she even realized she had let go. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, sending pieces flying across the carpet. The soft clink of the last shard settling seemed to echo louder than the silence that followed, and didn't move. Her hands trembled, and her breath caught in her throat. The letter Camilla, his letter, still sat on the side table, its words calling through her mind like a cold wind in an open room. She asked for Charles. She asked if he ever truly loved her. Those words struck her again, louder, now clearer. Tears began to fall before she felt them sliding quietly down her cheeks, cutting through years of practiced stillness. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was something deeper. It was guilt, and wiped at her face clumsily, but the tears didn't stop. Diana's voice seemed to float into the room, not from memory, not from imagination, but from something she'd pushed far, far away. It had been years, but in that moment Diana felt close, and with that closeness came the memories. The first time she met Diana truly matter, and had been wary. The young girl with wide eyes and nervous smiles had entered their world with fragile hope, and remembered standing beside her in the drawing room, both silent, both pretending to be at ease. She looked so young and whispered to no one, her voice cracking too young. There had been something innocent about Diana in those days, a brightness, but also a nervousness that never seemed to leave her. She was kind, open, and unguarded, traits that didn't always survive behind palace walls. And try to remember the laughter, the rare times when Diana would burst into a fit of giggles over something silly, something human. Once during a royal garden party, Diana had stepped in a puddle and ruined her shoes. She had laughed, bent over in joy, holding on to an arm for support. "It's only water," Diana had said, eyes sparkling, "but now I look like I swam here," and had smiled, but even then she didn't know what to say. Diana had a way of inviting closeness, while still seeming distant. There were layers to her pain, layers that only revealed themselves, and quiet corners away from flashing cameras and polished speeches. And mind drifted to a particular Christmas. The tree had been tall, shining with gold, and reed music played softly through the halls. The palace had been filled with chatter, with laughter, but Diana had stood alone by the window, gazing out into the snow. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, not from cold, but from something else, something no one had dared to name. And had seen her there. She had walked over, standing beside her. "You right?" she had asked casually, cautiously. Diana didn't turn. "I'm trying to be," that was all she said, and hadn't pressed. She offered a soft smile, then walked away. She didn't know what to say, or perhaps she hadn't wanted to open a door she couldn't close. Now that moment haunted her. "I should have stayed and whispered. I should have listened." Another memory came clearer than the rest, a late afternoon ride on horseback. Just the two of them. The air had been crisp, the fields quiet. They had trotted side by side, the silence between them filled only by the sound of hooves on earth. Diana had spoken suddenly. "Sometimes I wish I could disappear," she had said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Just vanish for a while, just to breathe," and had looked at her uncertain. "You'd be missed?" Diana had smiled faintly. "Would I?" It hadn't sounded like a question, it sounded like a wound, and remembered how her mouth had opened to say something, anything, but no words had come. She had remained silent. That silence screamed at her now. She dropped to her knees, gathering the broken pieces of the teacup. With shaking hands, the edges were sharp, but she did. "I didn't feel the sting. Did I fail her too?" she asked aloud, the words heavy with sorrow. "Was I just another person who looked away?" She clutched a shard, and her palm gripping it tightly before letting it fall. The letter still sat there like a shadow in the light. It wasn't just Camilla confession that hurt, it was the reminder that so many had stood by while Diana fell apart, and wasn't blind. She had seen the change in Diana, the way her laughter became rare, the way her eyes began to hold more sadness than sparkle. She had watched her shrink day by day behind a wall of expectations, cameras, and cold smiles. but she hadn't said a word. She had been raised to stay strong, to stay silent. She thought silence was strength, but now it felt like weakness. It felt like a loss. And rose slowly, her body heavy. She moved to the window where Diana once stood and placed her hand against the glass pane, touched the outside, mirroring the tears still on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for not seeing you clearly, for not hearing you." The sky outside was grey, the clouds thick and unmoving, and turned away from the window, her shoulders trembling. She crossed the room and picked up the letter again. Her eyes traced the line she had already read, hoping somehow to find something she missed. The room where grief finally spoke. The sky that day was not just grey, it was bruised, thick. Clouds hung low, as though the heavens themselves were heavy with sorrow. The cold air pressed against the palace walls, wrapping its chill around every window pane. Not even the fireplaces could chase the stillness away. Inside one of the oldest drawing rooms of the estate, everything was silent. The curtains barely moved. The walls, once echoing with polite conversation, seemed to listen now. And in the center of it all stood Princess, and her back to the door, her arms folded like a shield across her chest. She wasn't wearing her usual expression of quiet strength, not today. Today her eyes stared blankly at the fire, red-rimmed and tired, as if she had been standing there for hours without moving. She heard the door open behind her, but she didn't turn. She didn't need to. The sound of Camilla, his footsteps, slow and uncertain, filled the space. Like ripples on water, each one seemed to weigh a lid more than the last. She walked with no jewelry, no painted smile, no airs, only a silence that matched. And Camilla spoke softly, her voice like cracked porcelain, and stayed still. "You should have told me a long time ago." "I know," Camilla replied. The fire crackled, and the old clock ticked once, then again. The quiet between those takes stretched like a thread pulled too tight. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Camilla said, her voice a little lower now. "I only told you because I couldn't carry it anymore." And slowly turned. Her eyes met Camilla, and for a moment the room seemed to freeze. The pain in her gaze wasn't sudden, it had been growing layer by layer for years. But now it stood there. "Then why me?" and asked, not angrily, just tired. Camilla took a breath. "Because you cared for her. You saw her even when everyone else looked away," and fingers curled. "But you heard her," she said, her voice wrong. "You knew what she said in the end, what she was feeling, what she needed. And you kept that from everyone." Camilla looked down. "Yes," and lips quivered just slightly. "She said she didn't want to pass away alone." "I know," Camilla whispered. The fire shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. She begged for someone to come and went on, as if saying the words would somehow make them less real. She was scared, and no one went. Camilla closed her eyes. "I hear her at night." That last question, "It never leaves me," and voice trembled. "Did she ask for him?" Camilla nodded yes. Even then she still hoped he'd come, and stepped back, her body stiff, her mouth tight with grief. She waited, and he never came. She passed while waiting, Camilla said quietly, "while we argued over appearances and titles," and collapsed into a chair like the weight of it all finally crushed her. She didn't bother to hide her face, her hands covered eyes, but her sobs filled the room, unfiltered, unpolished. It was the cry of someone who had been strong for too long. She had never cried in front of Camilla before, but now there was no holding back. The tears weren't for show, they were real. Years of guilt, regret, and silence spilled from her heart at that moment. Camilla didn't approach. She stood still, hands clasped before her like a woman at confession. Her own face was pale, her lips pressed together tightly. She let her cry. She knew any touch, any words would feel like intrusion. "I should have done more," and gasped. "I should have seen it. I should have said something." Camilla, his voice was barely a whisper. "So should I," and tear-streaked face looked up. "She trusted us, and we all let her down." A long silence followed, filled only by the fire's soft murmur and the occasional creak of the floor as the house settled under time pressure and wiped out her cheeks. Why did she have to pass away with so many questions in her heart? Camilla exhaled deeply. Because none of us had the courage to answer them, and shook her head slowly. She deserved more. She deserved peace. Camilla nodded, and she found no, not in life, not in the end. Their eyes met again, and for a moment there was no royalty, no rank, no blame, just two women holding the same wound in different hands. Outside, the wind hissed softly against the stones. Somewhere in the palace, a distant door closed. Life moved on. But here in this quiet room, time seemed to hold its breath and broke the silence. She loved him even when it broke her. But didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence set at all, and stood slowly wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve. And now we live with the pieces. Camilla gave a small nod. Yes, we do. But this wasn't all. There was more. A journal that will come up next. Words and grace. The rain had followed, and home it tapped gently against the tall windows of our sitting room, soft but persistent, like a voice calling from far away. The air smelled faintly of old paper, dust, and forgotten memories. She had come straight home after her meeting with Camilla, carrying with her a silence that clung like fog. Her heart felt heavy, her eyes tired, but something inside her refused to rest. There was something she needed to find. She moved slowly through the halls of her private residence, her footsteps soft against the creaking wooden floor. Every room she passed held a memory, a story, or a silence she had long since buried. But tonight she wanted to remember. In a small guest room tucked away in the far corner of the house and opened the closet, she knelt and pulled out an old wooden box, its corners worn from time and handling. Inside were keepsakes she hadn't touched in years, letters from friends, childhood drawings from her children, photographs faded with time when she saw it. Tucked beneath a silk scarf was a small leather-bound journal, brown, soft-aged. Her breath caught. She remembered it now. Diana had given it to her during a quiet birthday lunch, just the two of them seated on a sunny terrace. "I wrote a few things down," Diana had said shyly, pushing the journal across the table. "Just little thoughts. You don't have to read them now or ever," and had smiled politely, thanked her, and placed the journal in her handbag. She had meant to read it. She really had, but life swept her away. Now her fingers trembled as she held it. She sat by the fireplace, the light flickering softly across the cover. Slowly, gently, she opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's, soft, flowing, graceful to an "In case you ever wonder what I couldn't say out loud," and blinked back the sting and arise, and turned the page. "Sometimes I feel like a ghost in my own life. People look at me, but they don't really see me, not as I am, just as they want me to be." She turned on. "Oh,